is joining. I can see the numbers going up here. We have some local PCA partners. We have some local board members, national board members, leadership council members, PCA friends and family. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to go through a quick little run of show before diving into the main part of today. We're going to do a little welcome from our Midwest Regional Director, Rob Dauphiné. Then we will do the conversation with Coach Tony LaRussa, and then we will do a little bit of a Q&A and then some final comments. And just a few quick things to remember. This is a webinar format, and so everybody will be on mute. If you want to ask a question, please use the chat feature, and we will be monitoring the questions that come in so that we can then pass those over to Jason Sachs, who will be moderating the conversation. This call is going to be recorded just so we can use it for our purposes to extend some of the amazing coaching tips that we're going to get today. And last but not least, have fun, enjoy it. And so with that, I am going to introduce Rob Dauphiné. So Rob, if you want to come off camera and get us started. Thanks so much.
Terrific. Thank you, Casey. Good morning, everyone. As a fan of good coaching and a lifelong White Sox fan, I couldn't be more excited to be on the call this morning and with our special guest. And so before we get started with our conversation, I'd like to share just a few words with you about Positive Coaching Alliance. PCA, together with Coaching Corps, is the largest youth sports training organization in the country. We proudly work with over 1,000 schools and youth sports organizations around the country, training nearly 65,000 youth and high school coaches, impacting nearly 1 million young people. Our vision for youth sports is simply a future where all kids from all communities can experience a positive youth sports environment, where they develop as not only better athletes, but more importantly, as better people, learning how to be good teammates to each other on and off the field. The Million Coach Challenge is a national initiative that is started by Chicago's very own Susan Crown Exchange. And PCA is proud to be the anchor training partner. We're looking to train 400,000 coaches in social and emotional learning, with 50% coaching in underserved communities. Other than school itself, youth sports represents the next biggest platform to teach kids character education. That's the opportunity for us, and we're very grateful to Mr. LaRussa to be on the call with us this morning. It's a big deal and draws attention to the work that we're trying to do. Speaking of thank yous, I'd like to thank my local board of directors here in Chicago, our Playmakers, who help lead our fundraising efforts, connect us to the community, and provide thought leadership. If you are interested in learning more about how to become involved with PCA, whether it be in Chicago or in other markets across the country, please drop me a line. Keenan's going to drop my email in the chat, and I'm happy to talk with you about different ways of being involved. Next slide, please. As a charitable organization, of course, you can be involved in many ways and be a playmaker for PCA. And we have listed here just a few ways your support can help us in a meaningful way support our local youth baseball and softball partners. We have many of our coaches on the call with us this morning. Appreciate the great work that they do with their young players. And of course, are proud to be their partners. Next slide, please. We'd also like to call to your attention the amazing work that Mr. LaRussa and his family are doing through the Animal Rescue Foundation, ARF. We're going to drop a link in the chat here for you to check out the great work that they do. GiveArfLife.org. Take a look. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague and teammate here at PCA, Mr. Jason Sachs, to lead today's interview. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks everybody for joining us this morning or afternoon. As we've all mentioned, we're thrilled to be able to have Tony LaRussa with us. He's been a member of PCA's National Advisory Board, and his statistics as a manager speak for themselves. 2,821 career wins. That's second most all-time baseball managers. 3-time World Series champion, 4-time Manager of the Year, 6-time pennant winner, and was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2014. And if you look at his career over as a manager spanning 4 different teams, actually 3 different teams, we're excited to have him back with the White Sox, but started out with the White Sox for 9 years. Growing up as a baseball fan myself on the East Coast, I vividly remember his Oakland Athletics teams and just the force that they were in the league at that time. And then went on to manage the Cardinals, winning World Series there. And then also now we're excited to welcome him back and had a great year as the American League Central champs in 2021. So I want to bring in the Chicago White Sox manager, Tony LaRussa, and we're excited to have a conversation with Tony now. We can just bring you off mute, Tony. There we go.
Good morning.
So, Tony, thanks so much for being with us today.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I'd like to start at the very beginning. You know, as you were playing and you were thinking about your career, you know, just thinking about the potential of becoming a coach or a manager. And Tony, I think we just lost your camera. If you can just click the camera. There we go. What was it that was an interest of you to get started into coaching? What really was it that drove you to want to be a coach and a manager?
I just go back to, you know, when I was a kid in Tampa, Florida. You know, my family, especially my dad, huge baseball fan. We were coincidentally Al Lopez, who managed the White Sox, and I think still has the most career wins. He was a hero of ours in Tampa. He was a major leaguer as a catcher, and then later on as a manager. So I grew up with baseball, and you know, played all the sports, but loved baseball. Signed out of high school. You know, I was in uniform a long time. The less it's said about my playing career, the better. But the last 3 years of my 16 years, I was a player coach.
Yeah.
You know, at some point, I realized I wasn't going to be good enough, whatever the excuse is or explanation. But the player coaching experience really, really fired me up because, you know, when I had decided, Elaine and I, you know, I wasn't going to make it. You know, that's when I got the law degree and was going to be a lawyer. But my first 2 years, I was with the White Sox, and a great man named Lauren Babe. He really gave me a chance to see, not as a player, but as a player coach, what managers and coaches are supposed to do to help teams get ready. And then my last year, I was with the Cardinals. And I mean, I enjoyed it so much. It was doing what I loved, staying close to the game. That at the time we didn't have children. So hey, why don't I just try and get it out of my system? And the White Sox get a AA job and then AAA, and pretty soon I'm managing the White Sox.
Yeah, and it's stayed in your system for quite a long time, still in your system. As we mentioned, second all-time winningest manager, over 34 seasons, 3 World Series championships. We read a quote that, you know, at the beginning of the career, you said, you know, love the game and want to learn it. And, you know, in order to stay involved at such a high level and continue to be successful for that long of time, you need to be a continual learner. So can you just talk us through on like how you try to continue to push yourself to learn and grow as a coach, and how that's then translated into some of the relationships with your teams, and also how the game has changed over those 34 years?
I'm always very careful to compliment and give credit to the mentors. I mean, I've been mentored even as a player in the Oakland A's organization. You know, we were taught how to play the game right, and they, you know, ended up being champions. But that learning and loving the game, that I was introduced to that in 1977, which was my last year as a player coach. And the gentleman was George Kissel, who was a legendary figure in coaching. Not just, he was with the Cardinals for years and years, but he reached out to so many people. And when I first indicated after that player coach thing that I would like to try to manage, he asked me, he says, "How much do you love the game?" I said, "Well, I think I love it." He says, "Well, the question is, do you love it enough to learn as much as you can? Because the game is meant to be learned. Otherwise, you have nothing that you can transmit to the players And then he told me something that was really prophetic. He says, there's a wonderful cycle. If you love it enough to want to learn, you will learn in your career that the more you learn, the more you love the game. And that's why that initial piece of advice, I had to learn, because I was a really lousy player, had a lot to learn about other parts of the game. I had to learn the value of coaches.
Mm-hmm.
We always had great coaching staff, starting with the White Sox right through A's and the Cardinals, and now again. But I it's just like George in my early days with the Cardinals as a manager, and he was in his 80s. You'd bring in a speaker, George would be there in the corner with a notebook and making notes.
Yeah.
And that's why that's the first piece of advice that I would give to this morning.
Yeah.
Is that, if you want to be an effective leader, coach, the way that you earn respect is to have something that you contribute to a player to make them better, or a team to make it better. Well, you just can't imagine that stuff, and you have to really make it a goal and study it. So you learn from other leaders in other industries, other coaches, whatever, and you learn from your experiences. And then what I found was that the more that I learned, the more I really appreciated the game of baseball. And, just the big and the little, all the little pieces that have to come together to have a successful career as a player or a team. And so I'll give you the best example. This was another great mentor, was Dick Williams, 1971. I made the A's team out of spring training and was there for most of the season until August. And that was the A's beginning of their great run. They won the division, got beat in playoffs, and then won 3 World Series. But I was traded in August. But around Dick, he knew that I had this interest. So, he answered my questions. And then later on, he told me when I started managing. And this is a great, they say, if you make a point, if you can give an example,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what the coaches, I think, would benefit from.
Yeah.
He says the most learning you get is the game that was just played. So he gave me his process, which is something that I used 5,000 times since then. When the game is over, I take an hour or two to review the other team, because we had a plan to how to pitch and get them out and hit them. Then I reviewed what our plan was. And you get these little nuggets, that means that the next time you compete, you're better. And then last, which is one of my favorites, he would say, look, analyze how the game was won and lost.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that on a nightly basis, you'll see how often the effort level of one team over the other is an advantage, and mostly execution. So I thought that, I've embraced that. And I think that that's a wonderful message for coaches. Love it and learn it. Then you keep loving it more and you're learning. There's a lot of places to learn, but your actual experiences from the practice of games are the best.
That's great. There's a lot in there that I want to unpack a little bit more. So one of the things you said was about what you can contribute as a coach to the players. And I think I want you to talk about how you balance the two of managing the team as a whole, but then also building relationships with each player. So talk about how you do that within a team.
Jason, that's an excellent next point to make, because as you gave the first question you asked about, and then you said about over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And most anybody that knows, I signed out of high school in the 60s. Mm-hmm. The major league game was different then. Yeah. And I was there sitting on the bench for a while. And in those days, the manager and the coaches, they could be authoritarian. They could really stand up there and say, do this, do that. Yes, sir. Well, when I started managing in 79 to now, and you can ask any coach in any sport, and you can ask in business, the most effective way to lead is through relationship building. You have to get something established where the player or your employee, whatever, and here we're talking easily. You can talk players. And there's an easy way to limit to three things. You need to earn their respect. It's not just the respect of your position because you're the coach. That's not enough. Kids nowadays, they want to know why. And you have to earn their respect by your knowledge of the game, what you present them to get better, and then how you practice them, what the drills are, and then how you compete. The second one is they need to trust you. Well, they can read through BS, and you need to say the truth. They benefit as a player if you're honest with them in a positive way. That's why I love the positives in the PCA. You can have a positive approach to teaching and say, I believe in you, but right now, if you don't hit the cutoff end, you're not going to be a good enough outfielder. Yeah. But I believe that you will. So it's trust is truth. And the last thing, which is, it's really seems kind of corny, you have to show them that you care. Care, because that takes the personal part away from the field and on the field. I played for a great man who passed away recently for years. His name was John McNamara in the Oakland A's organization, even in the big leagues. And then, if you know, he went to Cincinnati. He was with the 86 Red Sox that had that nightmare finish. John McNamara and a lot of our teammates, we knew that John cared about us, and we tried harder because he had that personal connection. So I think the point to make or repeat, today's coaches, it's not enough to stand up there and have all the expertise and start disseminating it. Part of that, you have to get personal with the player and the players as a team. And you thinking always, what can I do to earn their respect? What can I do to earn their trust? And then how can I show my care?
That's great. It's so in line with so many of PCA's principles and our tools from, we talk about being truthful and specific with your feedback, and that's so right. And creating that caring environment is so important, and building that trust. So then you're able to have those maybe difficult conversations or provide the feedback, and the players know that it's coming from a good place.
Jason, I want to add one quick thing.
Yeah.
Because I know as coaches, as they take and how they make, if they believe in what I just said, then how do they make it work, right?
Yeah.
Sparky Anderson gave me a real good tip on the caring part and the closeness part. You need to get close to your players. But then he added this caution. You're still the leader. If you're too close that you can't have a tough conversation or make a tough decision, then you've gotten too close.
Yep. So
you have to balance that, because you still are the guy that's going to go out there and have to tell them the truth.
That's great. I want to go back to another item you mentioned earlier. You talked about after the game as a coach, what you're doing, and you're analyzing different parts of the game and spending an hour or two looking at those things. The baseball season's long, right? 162 games. There have to be long stretches. You go on losing streaks, you go on winning streaks. How difficult, or what do you do to try and, whether win or lose, how you can then move to focus on the next game in a good way? So are there things that you talk about with your team, whether it's a really high or really low, because that sometimes the game could end at, midnight and you're coming back for a noon first pitch the next day? So how do you get people to sort of keep on looking forward, but also paying attention to what you can learn from the previous game?
The key word you just mentioned is next. You must always be thinking about what's next. It's like right now, I just had a conversation with our coaching staff with the White Sox. We and this is a Bill Belichick thing. He's brilliant about this. Now you're thinking about the 2022 season. What you want to do is you want to talk about, what do we have to do to compete again in the Central? Let's see about winning the championship. Let's get to October. It's next. We are not going to walk around with a big smile on our face because we won the Central in 2021. Now, here's the key, though. You can look back if there's something that can make you better going forward. So it's okay, just like in a game. And this is like, I'm talking about our season, but now I talked about the example of the post-game review. If, when you go back to think about it, you'll think, hey, we left the run on third base with less than 2 outs 4 times in that game. We lost 1 run. Okay, that was a problem. What did we do? You analyze it, right? And you analyze it because next you want to talk to your players about how are we going to improve driving in that runner from third, or whatever the execution problem was. So the healthiest thing is to learn from the past, but you are always moving forward. If you have a tough loss, it's like, coaches know the truth of this. You suffer the losses more than you enjoy the wins. You enjoy 162 games. You win a game for an hour and a half, man, that's great. And then, hey, we got to win tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you lose a tough game, you literally have to challenge yourself. I got to put that thing away, because you can't lose tomorrow because you're still kicking yourself or whatever about being negative about yesterday. Yeah. So it's a very healthy process, but one that, and I'll use something that I'll drop. I was taught that you're always looking for the competitive edges. What is, if your team plays harder every day than the other team, that's an edge. If they execute better, it's an edge. Well, personally, if you have a mental, and you control your mind, by the way, there's no excuse for you not having a PCA kind of frame of reference. Yeah, it's in your mind. Okay, if you decide to always, when you're examining yourself, you say, well, I got to let this one go. Yep. I've learned as much as I can. I can't keep suffering because we should have won. So you just decide, I'm going to turn the page. And it's a very valuable strength that you have, internally, you have the ability to control what you think. Yeah.
So with that, one of the tools that PCA uses in our workshops, we talk about a mistake ritual, and really thinking about focusing on that next play. So if somebody makes a mistake, we don't want them dwelling on that, especially in the heat of a game, right? So are there things like, what's your message to players in the game? Let's say somebody, boots a ground ball or has an overthrow. I mean, they know they made the mistake, especially at the major league level. Like, what is your communication with them when they're making those mistakes, to try to get them to focus or make sure that they're not dwelling on it? So what's that type of communication look like?
A lot of times, the most important distinction you make is it a mental or a mechanical mistake? Yep. If it's a mechanical mistake, then you have to be really careful, because trying to fix a guy's swing in the middle of the competition, you can tweak it, but you've just got to be really careful. Same thing with a pitcher. Yeah. If a pitcher is mechanically off, your responsibility is to tweak, but nothing major, because that just distracts. Right. Now, if it's mental, then you can be more direct. The easiest one is, we're going to run the ball out, and you don't run it out. Yeah. That was a medical, that doesn't go with executing, playing hard, right? So I know I work right now again for Mr. Reinsdorf, Jerry Reinsdorf. And in the early days, back in the 80s, he had this really important phrase that he passed along to me, that he used in business. Like, hey, that applies to us. And it goes right what we just explained about what's next. When you're going to talk to somebody about how to get better, he said, use the pat and pop philosophy. You pat the guy on the back. Hey, you're really good. You've been great. And pop. But what you just did is not good enough. But I believe that you're going to fix it. It's very important for the player to know that he messed up. He must get better. But it's really important that he understand that you're positive about what he's done and what he will do.
That's great. That aligns so closely with some of the things that we talk about in our workshops. We talk about providing feedback and criticism, because as coaches and leaders in the business world, we need to criticize, we need to critique, we need to teach. And so we give coaches this tool of a criticism sandwich, right? Like starting with that positive, letting know them the feedback and the correction, and then sending them back out with a positive. And I think what we need to make sure that is true, as you said earlier, like they're going to read through the BS. So we need to make sure that all of that is truthful and specific to make sure that we're getting our point across as well.
Jason, I'd like to add one thing to this because it fits. For coaches, when I joined the White Sox in 1978 and 79 as a minor league manager, our player personnel director was a legend named Paul Richards.
Mm-hmm.
And he instilled in us as young coaches that there's always something else you can do. In fact, if you look at the great leaders, the General Moore that was in We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson, he always would say, there's always something else you can do. What you never want your players to think is you've given up on them. We've done all we can and we're still struggling because you're just not good enough.
Yeah.
That's a real cop-out. If they see that you are always going to find a way to keep attacking the problems, it's just like as a staff with our major league coaches for the years. When we had a meeting, we never allowed ourselves to say, look, these guys just aren't good enough. Well, you know what? We're not good enough as coaches.
Mm-hmm.
So make it a point, whatever, I don't care how hard the obstacle is with your team or your players. You're always thinking, hey, there's a different way for me to reach them. There's always something else that I can do. In fact, the great General Moore that visited the Cardinals for several springs, that's one of his 10 leadership points. And he became, a friend of the Cardinals, and he changed it then at the end to this is one of my absolute best memories. He says, there's always something else you can do. And in other words, 3 strikes and you're not out.
That's great. I love that. Yeah. Why give up after those 3 strikes? That's awesome. You've mentioned a couple times now, about your other coaches and your assistant coaches. And I think an important part of being the manager or also being, the head of a company or in business is the way you delegate, right? So maybe just talk through your relationship with your coaching staff and how you delegate throughout the season, but also within the game as well.
It's a great question. And that's a real challenge
mm-hmm.
for a head coach. If it's in, high school or college, they call them head coaches. In baseball, we call them managers.
Yeah.
Because, and there's some guys that are, really, really good players that know everything, and they would just overwhelm their coaching staff, and they were just, no, and so they wanted to embrace every part of the coaching themselves. Very unhealthy. Too much to do. Plus, you don't know what you don't know. If you're an infielder, you don't know everything about pitching. If you're a pitcher, you don't know enough about it, what position players have to do. But it's not the trick, because that's a terrible one, because you're not tricking anybody. The
Right.
balance is that as the leader, you have to create relationships with your coaches, respect, trust, and caring, and they have to go out there and take responsibility, be accountable for their area.
Mm-hmm.
But the very important point to make here is, as a manager, you cannot subtract yourself from any part of the game. For one thing, the players need to know that the coach has your support. So you have to be able to pay enough attention to the base running, the infield or outfield defense, how you're pitching. You have to stay versed in it. I'll go watch bullpens, and I don't push the pitching coach aside, but I'm listening, I'm watching. And if there's something I don't think we're getting enough balls down the strike zone, we're going to talk about it as a staff. But you let the coaches coach. But I think the key point to make is, do not eliminate yourself from any part of your game. The players have to believe that you are watching everything is there and you're impacting. And as a matter of fact, as you grow as a coach, head coach, or as a manager, part of the box that you have to check is that you do have a working knowledge about pitching.
Yep.
And infield play, defensive, you have to know those things. But the way that the most of the actual work happens is delegated through the coaches.
Yeah. I think a related point that I want to shift the conversation to a little bit right now is organizational culture and team culture. And, you throughout your career, both as a player, a manager, as a consultant, you've been with the White Sox, Cardinals, the A's, and we're going to talk about the A's in a little bit here, but the Diamondbacks, Red Sox, Angels, like so many different teams. Talk about, PCA, when we talk about culture, we define it as the way we do things here. And we really try to provide that tangible definition for people. How have you seen different teams have different cultures? And then what have you tried to do to establish cultures when you've gone into new organizations as the manager?
Well, during my playing career, the A's were really an outstanding organization. You had really great player development. I mean, you think about it, when I got to the A's in summer of '86, Jose Canseco was going to be the rookie of the year. Mm-hmm. The next year, McGuire's rookie of the year. Year after that was Walt Weiss. Mm-hmm. The farm system was outstanding. So I learned that also as a manager, but as a player. One of the things that you had to understand, if you have a winning team, there's a winning feeling within the clubhouse. Mm-hmm. And then you try to identify what it is, and it's mutual respect, trust, and caring. So one of the things you try to do, and this was consistent from my AA and AAA team to my big league teams, we were going to create a family feeling. That was our environment, that's our culture, that was our chemistry. And the analogy is, if you're a husband and a parent, if you're an outstanding husband, an outstanding parent, and that relation exists, if all of a sudden you get sloppy and you ignore the kids or you ignore your wife, it's not an automatic thing. Relationships have to be started, maintained, and continued, right? Mm-hmm. So we did this thing. We had players still do it. You had to make a commitment. What's a commitment? It's a promise that you wanted to be part of the family. Now, how did you do that? You're going to earn the respect, the trust, and the caring. And I see, I don't know how this is going to sound to everybody that's listening, but I hear it more and more. There is a love that gets established. The best part of my whole career is when I see guys from the White Sox of the 80s or the A's, like I just mentioned off camera, to Wally Hassett. Just had dinner 2 nights ago with Dave Stewart, Dennis Eckersley. Same thing with the Cardinals. Yeah. What we say to each other when we leave, I love you. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, corny as it may sound, you can build that. And if you build that, I had this great, I don't know where I read it. It's a tangible, intangible. If you see a team that has chemistry, that has a great culture, that's not a tangible thing, but it's so intangible that you can feel it, right? Yeah. All right, I'm gonna give a good example. You have it, you win the championship. Everybody's saying, well, we picked each other up, we were playing for each other every day, right? The next year, that same team struggles. Why? Because they didn't take care of the relationships. Mm-hmm. They started, Pat Riley one time said in the book, Showtime, once you win, you have the disease of more. Everybody wants more attention for themselves. They get away from contributing. Yep. With the A's, we had a great instructor named Mac Newton. And he said something that I thought was so simple. He explained commitment as a promise. So I'm going into depth with this because that's how you build your team. You build it. Your foundation is a foundation of relationships, family, and you build it with the things that I said. And each person has to make a promise, and we all have to be accountable to that promise. and we all have to challenge each other. Hey, you promised. Where the hell were you yesterday? You know what I'm saying? And now, once you do that, the practice makes sense. The competing makes sense. Without that, then you're just a bunch of individuals trying to seek fame and fortune.
That's great. I appreciate that feedback. And I think I love the idea of the love that's created within a team. And I think across sports, you brought up the, disease of more with Pat Riley, but I think if you look across all sports and, another PCA National Advisory Board member, Steve Kerr, coach of the Warriors, the team environment that he has created with the Warriors and like the joy and the love that team has shows, and it allows them to get through, obviously there's a lot of talent on that team, but it's also much more than that. And so that love and those relationships that are created start with the leadership, because it comes down to the culture that you're creating. So,
well, the Warriors for years have played against other teams with great talents.
Yeah.
And that tangible and intangible that they have, I'm from the Bay Area. I've seen that. And I happen to know Coach Kerr.
Yeah.
You got to work at it, but coaches put that at the head of your priority. You want to have a team that's a family.
Awesome. And I just want to remind people, please do drop your questions in the chat. We're going to get to those in a second, but we just talked about the Bay Area. We talked about the A's a little bit. So I want to bring in another guest here to the conversation. Many of you that are on this call know that PCA recently announced a merger with Coaching Core, and we are so excited about this merger with Coaching Core. So I want to welcome in the founder and chairman of Coaching Core, Mr. Wally Haas. And there's a great connection here, as the Haas family was the owners of the Oakland A's, and Wally actually served as the team president for that great run while Tony was the manager. So Wally, welcome to the conversation here.
Thank you, Jason. It's great to see my friend Tony. Being part of this conversation, needless to say, reminds me of he made us look so smart for those 7.5 years, because leadership starts at the top, and Tony brought that. And I just, as I was listening to Tony talk about all of these tenets that you need to be successful, they really are. They're so transferable in life. It can be, sports is such a great vehicle for these life lessons. And Tony just gave so many great examples around trust and respect and commitment in family. So it's great to be reminded of that.
Awesome.
Well, I'll say this. I love Wally Haas, and I love the Haas family. He knows how I felt about his mom and dad. They treated my wife and kids like family. But I think a point to make, it really applies professionally. And I'm sure it applies, not so much high school is tough, college probably more so. But the strength of the organization from top to bottom, when those guys in uniform respect and trust people in the front office and the ownership, it's the bosses. And when you know that they respect scouts and player development, see, that's a strength, that's an edge. There are other organizations that are floundering because, some of that breaks down in places. I don't know if we're going to get into the metrics now or at some point, but if you're careful and the metrics are at a great place, but if you overwhelm the traditional side, you're not as good. So the key part about the A's for 10 years, it started at the top. He mentioned the top. It was the coaching staff, and I was part of it. But the ownership and the front office, Sandy Alderson, and the people that work there in the player development, without them, the A's would not have had all that success.
Great. I'd love to, I think, using the phrase inside baseball, but tell us a little bit more about Wally, as you as the team president and Tony, you as the manager. What was your relationship like, and how did you all, how much communication was there? And just basically, how did you two coexist during that time?
It's another good, that's another very good question, because it's surprising to me to this day that there are some organizations that do not communicate from upstairs, like owner, front office, with the people in uniform, like the major league staff. And all of a sudden they'll say, hey, We're bringing Jason up, and you went, you are? Why? With the A's, constant communication, we all had the same goal. Win as much as we could. Let's get into playoffs. Let's win a championship if we can. And the way that works most efficiently is you get input. You get input from your player development about who looks good. You get input from your professional scouts about who you might acquire. You get input from your guys in uniform. With the A's, because of, Sandy Alderson and his group and our ownership, there was constant communication. And in the end, by the way, they make the decisions about who they're going to put on in uniform. But it was very healthy for our staff to have input.
Well, I think that's right, Tony. And yet I think sometimes as an owner, you have to be very careful of, you think you know baseball, for example, and this and that, but obviously, again, I learned this from my dad. You hire the right people and you let them do their jobs and you stay out of their way. And I'm not sure we always fulfill that role exactly, but it was what we should have, we tried to do. The other thing that was hard as an owner and as a fan is not to fall in love with your players sometimes. And particularly when you had players like Dave Stewart and Dennis Eckersley, that sometimes is pretty darn hard to do. Two of my very favorites of all time. And, some of the hardest decisions is, do you resign and they become a free agent, this, that, and the other thing. But we were just very fortunate there was such great chemistry. There was such great trust and respect that it worked quite well. And again, we were very fortunate to have, the best manager I've ever seen play, be a manager as our manager, frankly, in Tony.
As we discussed at dinner 2 nights ago with Eck and Stu, we're still haunted that team only won one of the 3 World Series. And they decided, and I agreed, it was the manager's fault that we only won one.
Tony, I got to tell you, you got to keep moving on, right?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Move on, let go, man. That's Tony, but seriously, just real quick, Dacian, it's why Tony has had so much success, because the losses drive him much crazier than the wins for all of his accomplishments. And that has got it, it takes a toll, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I want to get to one quick story for the two of you, and then we'll move to the Q&A. But while you mentioned, and his name's been brought up a couple of times, Dave Stewart, and many of us on the call remember Dave is just such a force as a pitcher. But just talking about the transformation that Dave had under under Tony LaRussa, and just how he was able to grow, and just competing against Roger Clemens and some of the great pitchers in the American League at that time, and just what his growth looked like during that time.
Well, I'll let Tony tell the story, but the other part of Dave Stewart that very few people know is he understood giving back to the community probably better than any other player I've ever met. My father was very community oriented. It was one of the reasons we actually bought the Oakland A's, believe it or not, was because in Oakland at the time, the Raiders had left. And he just felt here was a distressed community, and it would be very difficult. We grew up Giants fans at the time, never again, but at the time that it would be devastating. And it was one of the ways he could rationalize doing this. And Dave, we created an award in my father's name. And if we were honest, Dave Stewart would have won it every year, because he just was that kind of a human being giving back. Now, Tony has a much better baseball story about Dave Stewart, and I'll let him share that.
Which one? His first start?
You made him the starter in the first game, right? Against Mr. Clemens, yeah.
Well, I echo, if you know Dave Stewart, his personal side is great. This guy won 20 games 4 years in a row. Should have won a couple of Cy Youngs, but the East Coast Riders, fell asleep. But as great a pitcher and World Series MVP, went on to with the Torontos to win another World Series. His personal side and his strength is tied for first with him and Albert Pujols, the 2 best I've ever been around. So, but Dave Smoke was a catcher with a big arm. actually saw him pitch against the '83 White Sox. So in '86, when he got the job, and we talked about the transition, not just of Dave Stewart, but of Dennis Eckersley. You got to make sure you understand that the pitching coach was a guy named Dave Duncan, the greatest. And this is in all respect to other really great coaches. Dave Duncan is the greatest pitching coach in the history of the game. And he's the guy who really nurtured Stu as a starter and tweaked him and got him going. But the story Wally talks about is when Dave and I were trying to figure out who's going to pitch on Monday, the first game that we were going to be together. It was against Roger Clemens and the Red Sox in Fenway Park. The A's were in Milwaukee that weekend, and Dave and I were with our family. We were trying to find housing, and we were going to join them. We looked at the roster. We said, obviously, the Friday, Saturday, Sunday guy can't pitch. Who's left? Hey, they've got Dave Stewart. He's in the bullpen. They had just brought him over. I guess he had been released by Philadelphia. And we remembered Dave and said, I checked with the trainer, Barry Weinberg. Yeah, he's healthy. So I called Dave. Should I tell about the conversation, or you think Dave would get upset again, right? Anyway, I called Milwaukee, and I asked the operator, I said, I want to talk to Dave Stewart. So he puts me through to Dave Stewart. And Dave, he's a massive man. He's as macho as you can find, tough as nails. Yet, in fact, I kid him all the time that he should have sung with the Bee Gees. And so he answers the phone, hello. And so I say, Mr. Stewart, can I speak to Dave? This is Dave, and I will kick your butt. Who's this? And that was the beginning. Dave, he had the stare, but he is, when he's not competing, when he's not keeping score, he's just a beautiful human being.
And just as a quick side end note, Dave Stewart is now a new trustee of PCA's national board because he came over from coaching corps.
Yeah, we're excited to have him as part of the team, and as well as Wally and the entire coaching corps community. All right, we're going to get to some of the questions in the chat here. I want to start with some youth sports and youth baseball related questions, Tony. One, in your opinion, or from what you've seen, just talk about the state of youth or high school baseball with respect to the emphasis on travel teams and a lot of money in youth sports and the potential of specialization and kids playing baseball year round and the potential burnout. Just what are you seeing, or what are your thoughts on that?
I'm going to give you my opinion.
Yeah.
I would have to know a lot more to be overly critical or anything.
Yeah.
I worry about the travel squads for a couple of things. I think this is one thing I like about PCA. You're reaching out to kids all across the country. There are more kids that want to play baseball that are not on travel squads.
Right.
It's kind of an elite thing it's nice for the guys that can afford to be part of that, but all the rest of them that are missing, I'm not in favor of that. I think we need to reach out to them. Depending on the age, if all you do is play baseball for 12 months, I don't think that's smart. I think you do have a burnout. You may be testing some tendons in your arm and in your knees, whatever. I like that, sport of the season, and you get more specific later. The thing that probably I think the coaches, I would challenge you in two ways. One is, be really careful what you teach. Sometimes, we all, and not believe me, I address myself on this all the time. You got to know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's some fad looking stuff about how you hit and how you pitch and this stuff. And you got to really dig down into the actual fundamentals of the action. Yeah. Hitting and seeing the ball, keeping it and putting it stroke, fielding, So be careful, because there's some really far out basics that are being taught that I think are counterproductive. The other one that bothers me the most is how often do the kids get a chance to go to the ballpark and just throw the ball around instead of an organized practice. I grew up where you went to the park and we had all these games we made up, but it all had to do with putting the ball in play, making plays, maybe throwing the ball, making it fun. Yeah. And I do think that when a workout is scheduled, a coach's responsibility is that when it's over, the player should have thought, this was good exercise. I'm better today than before, but I had fun. And I think the coach's challenge is how do you keep the entertainment and the fun? A lot of times, it just put in some competitions, where you're competing, because guys enjoy that rather than just repeating the basics over and over. So there's a lot to say about that.
Yeah.
But mostly, I just wish, like PCA and I think in Major League Baseball, we're trying to get more kids just playing ball at younger ages during their time where they actually experience baseball. And I'm not a big fan of the NC2A because they give full scholarships to football and basketball. Mm-hmm. And they have these athletes are going to those sports instead of coming to baseball. That's bullshit.
So getting, you might have answered it with some of that, just like making sure they're having fun. But, myself as a parent, I'm going to be coaching, Little League Baseball this spring. What's your advice to youth coaches on, like, outside of focusing and making it fun, but like, what are one or two things that they should really be focusing on when we're talking about youth baseball? Is it like a specific fundamental? Like, what are the core things that we want to make sure that youth coaches are thinking about when it comes to baseball?
Okay. And we already established that we're going to be personal with these kids.
Yep.
And we're going to be patient with them. I think that my suggestion, if I was doing Little League or Cold League or whatever it is, Pony, whatever it's called now, American Legion, I would think about what is the legitimate ABCs of each of the executions. There's a proper way to catch a ground ball. Mm-hmm. There's a proper way to use your feet to get in a position to throw, whether you're an infielder or an outfielder. And I would go ABC. When I was a young guy in Tampa, Florida, there was a wonderful coach named Andrew Espelita, and he taught us what a stance looks like because it put our head in position and stayed on the ball. We caught the baseball right. So when people saw me playing, I was like 9, 10 years old. They said, man, who taught you that? Well, it was Andrew. So get your ABCs. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the pitching. Be very careful with the pitching. A nice delivery. Learn how to pitch. Make pitches rather than just throw. If you give somebody a really good basic fundamental basis, not only will they execute better, they'll have more fun because they're doing things better.
That's right. That's so important. Another question here. Tony, what's your guidance on how best to reset or encourage a player who is down on themselves because of their performance?
Well, first of all, I pat him on the back because he cares.
Yeah.
And I think about that for a second. There are guys that go out there and, hey, man, what's the big deal? I'm just out here. Whatever happens, happens. So if you have a guy, a player that is taking it too seriously, then I think you have to be really personal. And I have this conversation. And I just had one twice with a major leaguer and with the Chicago White Sox. To really be good, you got to care about what you do. Think about what just happened and want to get better. But when you self-examine, you cannot get to the point where it becomes a negative and you're worse. So there's a balance where, hey, what did I do wrong? I'm going to help you as a coach. We're going to fix it, but we're going to turn the page and be positive that it's going to work. If you constantly beat yourself up, at some point, you're working in the wrong direction and you're going to do much less. So a coach can really help them balance and figure out some way to get better, but just believe this is going to work, and you've got to work from a positive frame of mind.
That's great. That's great advice. All right. One last question. At any level, I think we want to always strive to win, whether we're playing youth sports or obviously at the top level. But what advice would you provide to youth and high school coaches on how to have a healthy balance between trying to win, but not necessarily having a win at all cost mentality?
Great question. And that actually works professionally as well. With the White Sox in 1985, I think we ended up like 12 games over 500 or something. that's one of my favorite teams over the 30 years, including champions. The idea is, as a coach, you say, look, fellas, this is really simple. It's our team against their team. And the effort we put into it for the 7 innings or the 9 or whatever it is, let's put our best efforts, try our best. But baseball is about executing.
Mhm.
So there are many, many times where the less talented team beats the more talented team, where the less talented team is catching the balls they're supposed to catch, throwing them accurately. Throwing. So what I would say to my team is, let's have the best effort and the best execution we have, and then we play a game. And the pressure is just, did we try our hardest, and did we try to play as good as we could? If the other team is better, you tip your hat. Therefore, yeah, you want to win because they're keeping a score. But you want to win. Winning is you can be a 500 team in the major leagues, and that can be a successful year if you had all those. You mentally were so strong that you would have been under 500 if you'd have given up.
Right.
So I think healthy for a coach is, let's just put the effort in. Let's play as good as we can, and if we win, good. What do we learn from it? Get better. If we lose, tip your hat. What do we learn? Get better. So winning is, you keep score. And you try to win, but you mostly are trying to do your best.
That's great. That's a great point to leave us on. Tony, I want to thank you, and I'm gonna welcome Rob Dauphiné back in just to wrap up here. But Tony, I want to thank you not only for this great conversation over the last 45 minutes, but for your support of Positive Coaching Alliance and Coaching Core over the years. Obviously, I think what we've learned from you today is something that all of us on this call, whether we're parents or coaches or in our everyday work life, we can take a lot that you provided with us today. So thank you for your support, and I'll turn it back over to Rob.
Thank you, Jason. Great job here today. And I'd like to also give thanks to PCA founder Jim Thompson for connecting us with Mr. LaRussa today. Special thanks to Wally for being on the call. And Tony, so many great takeaways from today's conversation. We can't thank you enough. I wrote down a bunch here about earning respect, having a positive approach to teaching, Pat and Pop. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and perspectives with us. This was really special today.
Well, Robbie, next time we talk, you better call me Tony. It's not, my dad was Mr. And this is the off season. We can do this for hours. I just know that the attention span of the people, at some point you got to stop. But I enjoyed it. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you again, Tony. We're wishing you and the White Sox the very best this season, and are excited to see the season get started here, hopefully real soon. And you have a great weekend in the meantime. And thanks to everybody for being on the call with us. Make it a great day and a great weekend.